Today, we're digging into a huge shift in the business world, and it's all about ESG. We're exploring why it's evolving from something companies just report on to something they actually run on.
So let's just start with the big question right up front. For the longest time, ESG has felt like a report card, right? A look in the rearview mirror at what you've already done. But what if that's all changing? What if ESG is becoming something way more fundamental, like your company's actual operating system?
To really get where we're going, we've got to understand where we've been. So let's rewind a bit and look at the old way of doing things. ESG as a reporting function.
For years, ESG has been on the sidelines. I mean, think about it. The big business decisions, they were all about cost, revenue, and efficiency. And then, only after the fact, the ESG team would get called in to measure the impact and, write a nice report about it. It was always an add-on, something bolted on, never something built in from the start.
And this table here really lays out the problem perfectly. The old reporting function was always reactive, always looking backward. Its whole purpose was to justify what you did. But this new model, the operating system, it's the total opposite. It's proactive. It's about making decisions and designing for the future. You're shifting from a tool that just describes the past to a logic that prescribes the future. And this quote just nails it. When ESG is only a report, it's so easy for it to become a narrative layer. A good story you tell people. But it's not an operational reality that actually changes how the business works day in and day out. All right, so let's pivot. Let's talk about the new way of thinking. ESG as the core logic of the business. This is where things get really interesting. So what do we really mean when we say ESG as an operating system? Well, think of it like a decision-making architecture. It means things like carbon emissions or supplier ethics are baked right into the core workflows. They're not an afterthought anymore. They are part of the very code that shapes how the entire company runs. And this whole evolution, it's not as new as it sounds. We've seen this exact same pattern before. Just think about cybersecurity. It started out as this small, niche add-on department, and now it's totally embedded in everything we build. Well, ESG is on that exact same path, moving from a simple add-on to the core logic of the business itself. Okay, but why now? Why is this massive shift happening at this very moment? Well, it turns out there are 4 key forces that are all pushing ESG right into the operational core. First, the very nature of risk has changed. Climate events and social instability aren't just headlines, they're direct threats to supply chains and profits. Second, the capital markets are paying attention. Investors are now pricing a company's long-term resilience into their valuations. Third, we just have the tech. Modern data systems make real-time integration actually possible. And finally, everybody, customers, employees, you name it, they're demanding real, provable action, not just pretty reports. So, we've covered the why, but what does this actually look like in practice? Let's take a look at the new business architecture that's being built on an ESG foundation. This is where it gets really tangible. At the process level, you're not just tweaking supply chains, you're completely re-engineering them. In your applications, things like your ERP and procurement software now have ESG scores built right in. At the data level, carbon emissions are treated with the same seriousness as revenue figures. And at the top, in governance, executive pay is actually tied to hitting sustainability goals. It literally touches everything. And here is the absolute crucial point. This whole thing marks a huge shift from just having an ESG strategy, which can just be a document with some nice goals, to building ESG infrastructure. This isn't a PR problem anymore, it's an engineering problem. So this shift creates a really fascinating new kind of company, the ESG native enterprise. And these companies have a powerful advantage because they're designed for this new reality from the very beginning. Think about it. ESG native companies don't have to try and cram sustainability into old, clunky systems. It's already in their DNA. They design their processes, their tech platforms, their entire business strategy with ESG baked in from day one. For them, sustainability isn't some annoying constraint, it's a core design principle. And this isn't some far-off theory. In practice, this means having procurement systems that automatically weigh carbon impact right alongside cost. It means when you're innovating a new product, environmental criteria are core inputs, not an afterthought. It's about building financial models that finally account for those long-term consequences. It's just a fundamentally different, smarter way to operate. But, and this is a big but, getting there is not easy. And that brings us to the final and maybe most important challenge, what the source material calls the uncomfortable truth of this whole transformation. And here it is. The really uncomfortable truth is that you can't get there by just making small incremental changes. Fiddling around the edges won't work. Hiring a new sustainability director won't solve it. This requires deep, fundamental re-engineering of the very logic of the business. I think this quote just says it all perfectly. The future of ESG is not in better reports, it is in re-engineering the way enterprises think, decide, and operate. It's not about polishing the hood, it's about rebuilding the engine from the ground up. Which brings us right back to where we started, with a question for every single person listening. For your organization, is ESG just a chapter in a report, or is it becoming a core part of your operating system? Because the answer to that question is probably going to define who wins and who loses in the next decade of business.